We'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this last webinar in the 2021 series, where we'll focus on quite a number of issues. Today, we are still looking at women's land rights. We focus on the land titling and documentation process and explore some important themes about what it means to own land as a woman in both state and customary land. But just to start us off, everyone is automatically muted as always, but please, as the presenters go ahead with their presentations, you can ask your questions in the Q&A tab, and those will be attended to at the end of the session when we have the Q&A. And also, please use the chat feature to just introduce yourselves, and if you have any questions or concerns, but questions particularly about the presentations, please post them in the Q&A tab. And when sending your questions or your chat, in the chat box, remember to select all panelists and attendees so that we all can see them. So thank you so much for joining us. And today I will hand you over to our facilitator, Matt, the Chief of Party.
Good afternoon, everyone. Really nice to be with you here today. I am going to be facilitating this session on women's land rights in Zambia, some of the lessons learned and ideas about actually more of the how to secure women's land rights in the context of both state and customary land. Last week, the discussions focused more heavily on the legal framework and national issues. And with this week's meeting, we want to really focus on how this is happening in practice, both with individual interactions of CSOs and NGOs with households, as well as the broader social norms change. We'll have presentations from some of the experience supported by USAID ILRG from Eastern Province, but we'll also have some experience from the National Titling Program that's largely taken place in Lusaka, but is expected to be expanded on state land in the coming months and years. You can see the list of speakers today, two speakers from the Chipata and Patauke District Land Alliances, Dumuna Piri from formerly of Medici Land Governance and currently an independent researcher, and then Patricia Malasha from the ILRG team, talking about the really important issue of gender-based violence in the context of land. So I'd like to get us started off with Adam Ngoma, the coordinator for the Chipata District Land Alliance, to talk about efforts of working directly with traditional leaders and working on social norms change. Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Let me share my screen. So slideshow. Okay, I hope my screen is shared now.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Like Matt mentioned, I'm Adam Ngoma from Chipata District Land Alliance. I'm the coordinator here. This afternoon, I want to share with you some lessons that we've learned through the implementation of the IRG project, basically focusing on social norm change, targeting traditional leaders to address barriers to women land rights. So I will give you a brief introduction on the program and the project. What you see in the presentation is just an outline of the documentation process. The documentation process has got steps in it. And one thing I want to highlight is to make mention to you that the documentation does not only result in the certification, but it can also be it can also have products like communal boundaries, those that are used for planning purposes, and then you can have customer use and administration guidelines. So the how part on how we do the documentation, as we all know that customary land is falls under the jurisdiction of the chiefs. So it's working with the chiefs together with the government. That's the Ministry of Lands. And the chief also has an administration which involves and has indunas and head persons, which goes down to community groups and also up to household level. But when you look at all this, the composition of the structures, like in chiefdom or at chiefdom level, you'll find that the chief has got what he has as the indunas, and these are decision makers who looks into what works for customary land, or what type of rules that can be put in place. So as I mentioned, that my presentation is focusing on women land rights. We are looking at the norms. So you find that there's a saying like, nothing for me is for me without me, something that is so critical in documentation process, because if we talk about women being involved and then they are not found at the higher level, higher authority level, at the chiefdom level, where decisions are made, then it is actually in vain, and the effort may just be wasted. So we have been working with the traditional leadership to look at some of the causes of women not being able to participate. Then we realized that actually, traditionally, a woman is not supposed to have a title, or is not supposed to be given the powers or the rights to land, because is considered to be someone who just comes, and in an event that there's death, that woman has to go back. So this is just an outline of the documentation and the introduction. So since 2018, with the support from USAID under the IORG program, we documented more than 6,000 parcels of land. That is our target. We achieved Nzamane, Munokwa, Maguya, and Mukanda. Now, because our focus was also looking at how are women coming in, how are they taking part? Is it possible to have the registration in the names of women with a lot of sensitizations and the engagement with traditional leadership? So we managed to register about 32,000 rights, where that's in total for the 6,705 parcels. Then when I talk of 32,000, someone may wonder, say, okay, 32,000 rights, and then you are talking of 6,700 parcels. How? There are other families which it is a choice of the landholder or landholding. Some would choose to have 2 or 3 landholders for one parcel. Others would choose to have the whole family being the landholders, meaning that they have equal powers on that land. So of the 32,000, we had 13,000 female, and then about 18,823 male. This represents 41% of women who were registered as the landholders under this program. So this slide talks about addressing gender norms to document women land rights. What are the issues? Sometimes on their own, women are just not willing. Some women not willing to have themselves or to have land registered in their name. And as a project, we took an approach of integrating gender in the process. like I mentioned, there is a process where you have to do the demarcation, you have to do the claims registration, you have in all those processes. Then we had to integrate gender that at all stages, in all steps involved in the process, we have to make sure that we have a gender lens to see how are women, where are women, why are they not taking part, and if there are reasons, then we address them. Then cultural rules and beliefs. So we engage traditional leaders, traditional leadership, targeting indunas who are the lawmakers of in traditional setup. So sometimes we see issues of unwillingness to confront the traditional norms. Some head persons and some chiefs, because maybe ever since the existence of the chiefdom, maybe the head person has taken up the show, like he has he has got more fields than any other, and they feel like it's by tradition that he's a man and then he can have even 10 fields. And now bringing in some interventions like why can't we have women also have access? Then there's that unwillingness to confront traditional norms by some traditional leaders. So we had to hold a series of dialogues on social and gender norm change on land administration with a special target of indunas, like I mentioned, that these are lawmakers. So whatever is agreed by the indunas, then it surely has an impact. Then gender roles, women busy with family care. You know, a woman has got chores. A woman is different from a man. When a man wakes up, then he just thinks of, okay, I have to go for work, I have to what. But for a woman, they have to think about what should I give my children before I go to the field. And then even in the field, they may also have a baby carried on their back. From the field, they have to go home and they start looking for food when the man is just, the husband is just maybe seated and what. And again, in terms of participating, you find that women participation is not so much because of these chores that they have. If you set up a meeting, maybe around 10 hours, they'll say, oh, we can only participate up to 11 hours because 12 hours we have to go home and prepare food for our husbands and so we have to raise a lot of awareness on gender and women rights. Also, agreement on the change that was required for women to have access to change. Then risk of GBV. Some women are not bringing out issues. Why? Because of fear that I can bring an issue on the public. Maybe when I go home, my husband will now attack me to say, why do you want to show off in public, like as if you are the only person? You want to show people that you are wise or what? And then they might be fighting. So we had to address these issues through creating a lot of awareness around the access to land rights. So impacts involving indunas and the so these slides represent what is it after we engage the indunas, who we say they are lawmakers. What is it that we've seen has changed? Has it changed or nothing seems to be changing? But we realized that at the end, as we were trying to evaluate our implementation time frame, we saw that there was increased awareness on the rights among women, because some women were able to actually advocate on their own for their rights, and they are even quoting some of the policies that protect them and promote their rights. So we also see increased law of women in decision making over land. Like I mentioned, traditionally, sometimes in Chiefs Council, you cannot, like in Ngoni, Ngoni tribe, in the Chiefs Council, you cannot find a woman there because that is where they discuss issues that on how to take care of a woman and the home. So there's completely 0% of women in these councils. But with those interventions, sensitizations, and trainings, and involvement of those lawmakers who brought this law that a woman cannot be a member of the Chiefs Council, a woman cannot be a head person, working closely with them, then we saw some women being allowed, like women who are accepted as full members of the traditional structure, and also as the head persons. We have got examples, like in Zamani, we have one woman who is a head person. She is the head of the village. In Munukwa, we have about 2 or 3 women who are sitting on the council discussing traditional matters and issues. So again, the traditional leaders influence inclusion of women. We see now traditional leaders themselves actually having an influence on the inclusion of women on land certificates. We had a lot of requests from chiefs, requests from households, requesting that we want to have this certificate instead of a woman being a person of interest. Let the woman be a landholder as well, so that they share equal powers with the husband. So we had also increased number of women accepting to register as landholders. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, that initially you could see women on their own not wanting, like feeling like it's a taboo. Say, hey, how? Me being a landholder? No. I have where I come from. Me, my land is where I come from. So here I'm just something, I'm a bollard pig here, I'm a what? All those sentiments. But now with those sensitizations and the engagements, we could see that now they are actually accepting to to be landholders. So impact of involving indunas and head persons, chiefdom rules, bylaws, supportive of land rights for women. Like I mentioned, policymakers or lawmakers, indunas, the holder of a document at chiefdom level, or the holder of the customs at chiefdom level, becoming aware and being able to see an inclusion of women in the land administration as important. Then they go back and start revising their documents and say, no, we have to include women and as human beings. So women recognize and can be landholders. It's no longer a taboo. In some areas where we've worked in, it's a normal thing. A woman can be a landholder. So chiefdom registers were changed to include women landholding. This is just the same as the point I raised. And then in disputization by traditional leaders took into consideration the rights of women. Initially, when you take a land issue, when a household takes a land issue to the traditional court, she had maybe 5% or 5%. She had only maybe 5%. 95% to do 95% support would go to the man, and then she's just battling for the 5%. I'm here because there's this issue of the land. So the questions would, where you come here with an issue of land. Did you come with land when you were coming from your father's place or your father's house? So you could see that, yeah, mostly women were so disadvantaged that sometimes they couldn't even be taking cases to court. So involvement of women in decision making in families led to reduce conflicts. This is a straightforward. Indunas and head person became gender champions in their chiefdom. We realize that when we engage, when we involve the lawmaker and give the lawmaker information and give them the responsibility, then you have an impact at the end, because they are actually the ones who change things, the ones who can make things work. So chiefdom rules, okay, so this was just a picture. So of course we had some challenges in the implementation, where most of the Indunas were not supportive. Like I mentioned, some Indunas, because of selfishness, they feel like if we allow this to happen, then my 10 fields, I may lose maybe 6 of them because I got them through corruption, I got them through evil acts on a woman. And so you could see some Indunas not being very supportive of the change, affecting the ability to commit to change for some Indunas. So chiefdom contexts were different. Like in traditional setup, the way Chief Munukwa is structured is not the way Maguya is structured. So if you develop an approach or a strategy, sometimes it becomes difficult, because what you think will work for Munukwa may not work exactly with Maguya. So we saw that we had those challenges. There was lack of consensus on the traditional practices that needed to be changed, and this resulted in misinformation on the ground. We have tribes like Chewa, and then we have Ngonis. So you can see that, you can find that in Chewa land, it's normal maybe for a woman to be a landholder, because them are treated like they are the owners. Mothers are the owners of land. And then in the Ngoni, they treat a man, because it's a matrilineal, a man to be the owner of the land. But now the intervention, if the intervention is talking about, okay, women do not have access to land, then it conflicts with some of the traditional makers. So Indunas are mixed up group, broad status, protocol, and power of influencing. You know, Indunas are human beings, and these human beings have different way of thinking. So we had those challenges where others would think in a positive way, others are thinking in a negative way. So again, the COVID pandemic, I think this is a country's show, where we are now in a new normal, but we still have those restrictions, and some meetings cannot take place on the ground due to COVID. So the recommendations that I may wish to share with you from my presentation is Indunas are very influential, and in whichever project or program that you'd want to address sensitive things like culture and let's say land rights, you're talking about a woman, it's always key to have those lawmakers, the Indunas, to be involved, and invest more time in deepening the analysis of social and gender norms, and agree what change that is necessary. Like I mentioned, they shouldn't be similar, or they shouldn't be the same strategies or approaches that you use in matrilineal that you can also use in. You need to do the assessment and analysis of what can work in this type of people, with this type of people, with this type of the tribe. So again, may have so many norms, but it's very difficult to address them at once, because at the end, you may have less impact. So the base is to focus on the few that you think they can bring out impact. Then even tools to use, they should be tools that are very simple and less time consuming, because you are dealing with the people who are sometimes illiterate, and sometimes with our long tools, sometimes they feel like things become bored, boring and then maybe lose focus. So that is, I think, what we have as a recommendation. And target women to embrace change. As you are trying to address issues that affect women, women should not be left out. And make sure that they are taking the central positions in trying to talk for themselves. So women were reluctant to take on leadership role in the traditional authority or to be part of the register, to be part to register their names. So you can see that because we engage women themselves, and then we looked at the culture itself, how does this affect this person? And then people are speaking on for themselves. Yes, we are affected because we cannot register our rights because we feel these people, they always insult us. They tell us, no, where you are coming from, where you came from, you don't have land. Why should you register your land here? So you get issues from the horse's mouth and try to address them with the relevant people in authority who can help to support change. So no one size fits all. Uniqueness, I think I've mentioned of this, is what works in Mnuba may not work in Maguya, but sometimes may work in Southern Province somewhere. So don't be too rigid in trying to address these issues. So champions are individuals and not groups. I've seen sometimes with our experience, it has worked to have an individual as a champion because there's that commitment and then there's responsibility. And then you are able to hold them accountable. But if you say, okay, we train 10 people to be gender champions, sometimes it doesn't work because each one of them will say, no, that was not me who was supposed to do that. No, it was not my responsibility. No, it was supposed to be who it was supposed to be. So that's what we feel like work that we need to, if you want to have an impact, then there's a need to identify individuals who can be champions. Like from our project as Land Alliance, we have about six champions who are even reporting, even after the project came to an end, but they are reporting issues on gender and successes on gender, because we have that one-to-one kind of talk, and also there's there's a sense in them that they have to be accountable for what they do. So that ends my presentation this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Adam. Appreciated. Over the course of this presentation, we've had about 15, 20 additional people join. So just to remind folks, this particular presentation was on the social norms and how to engage with traditional leaders, from the head person down to indunas and from the chief down to the indunas and head persons, and different strategies for doing so. If there are any questions for clarification from the audience, feel free to put within the Q&A box, to type it in. You can even raise your hand and I can unmute you for a question. I think, perhaps the most important thing that I observed during this process was that it takes time. It's not social norms is not something you can just come in one day and hold a meeting and say you've achieved it. It takes many consistent visits. Everyone moves at their own pace. And also, given that it is sensitive, in some ways you're suggesting that the ways that are currently being pursued within the local context are not appropriate, and that there's things that should change. But if you come in forceful and tell people they're doing things the wrong way, they're likely to resist. So it's really about a dialogue and a discussion and facilitating a discussion for people to figure out their own path. and certainly by working with leaders, that's important. So, are there any additional questions that come through? I will remind our speakers that you have 15 minutes to present, so that one was just a little bit long. But okay, if there's no more questions right now, we will transition to Chika Banda. Chika has been working on household documentation for the past 7 years as a lead community facilitator during the USAID TGCC program, and also as a chiefdom coordinator and gender officer within the Patauke District Land Alliance. Chika's presentation will focus more specifically on the actual process of land documentation and how women have been, women's land rights have been worked on by individual enumerators at the field level. So Chika, hand it over to you. And again, folks, please do introduce yourselves when you join in the chat box by selecting all panelists and attendees. Note the default is just to send a message to the panelists, and do put some questions in the Q&A box. Thank you, Chika. The floor is yours for the next 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Banda Chikampa. My presentation today will be based on securing land rights of women in customer land documentation. I've been working in Patauke from 2016, and I've been very experienced with field activities, more especially promoting women's land rights. So for the start, Matt, are you able to get me?
Yes, you were very clear. You're very clear.
Right.
Thanks. Continue.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I'll just give a brief background of customary land documentation for Patauke District Land Alliance. Patauke District Land Alliance has been working in Sengaland, and this is a matrilineal society, and the access to land is through a family head, while husbands still exercise power over use of land and its products. So you find that when land is being, you want to inherit land, you inherit land through the uncles. Those are the ones who head most of the activities where they want to share land to their nieces or their nephews. That is where you inherit your land. And not unlike the Ngoni type where you get from father to child, but here it is maybe from uncle to nephew. When in the event of death, in the matrilineal society in Sengaland, you find that either a wife or a husband loses rights to land and return to their own families. So from 2019 to 2021, PDRA applied a systematic approach to documentation parcel boundaries. And this resulted in where we saw over 6,000 total people with registered rights. Just like my colleague Adam has been explaining, it's just the building on what Adam has already been explaining. So the registered rights, which are 36,000, both landholders and also persons of interest, the people who benefited. And from the 56,000, we saw over 18,000 women with registered rights. So that is close to 50% of women who participated and registered their land rights. Then there were the 190 hectares of lands on participatory land use plan. And we demarcated over 6,600 parcel demarcation were done. And under forestry management, we had the 1,300 hectares plus which were under forest management. Then we support the project supported over 260 villages were supported. So during the process, interventions to involve women, so we had some opportunities which were given to both men and women. And these opportunities were, one, to ensure outreach of men and women and youth. So outreach, make sure that all women, all men, and including youth, not just youth, the boys, but youth including the women themselves, the ladies, were involved in the process. Then we had also community sensitization and resource mapping. And we tried to make sure that the community is well sensitized about the process. Every time you go out in the field to start talking about land issues, nowadays people have now realized the benefit of land, even the value of land. So every time you want to talk about land, you must make sure that you sensitize the people very well. They get the concept and what you really want to do. Because there are some issues where you find that when you go out to sensitize the people and they look at the log, maybe it is USAID, what, they may start thinking like you have just come to get land away from them. Then the other one was the boundary demarcations of parcels. So sensitization and encouraged to register as co-holders or persons of interest. So we tried by all means to make sure that at least people, spouses, register their land rights as co-holders. Or if not, most especially to women, women at least should be included even on the beneficiary part. And during claims, registered as holders or persons of interest, just as we have mentioned earlier on the boundary parcel demarcation. The sensitization continues to be given to people about registering them as co-holders. Because what we observed is that when you are registering on claims, you find that a man would rather register himself as landholder and put the rest, including the wife, as persons of interest. To some extent, others would even leave out the spouse, but add the children. So the point, the next point is women had opportunity to register if they own that parcel. That is when you see them coming through to come and register the land or their rights. Or if it was gifted the field by a family. So you find that maybe when they go
Chica, I believe you're breaking up a bit.
They move to a certain village. On that village, you okay. Matt?
Okay, why don't you start? Yeah, so good.
Okay,
you're back.
Are you able to get me?
Okay. Yes, I believe you're back.
So I think it's an okay. So I will talk about again during the claims registration, people, communities were encouraged also to register as landholders and the persons of interest. And the women had opportunities only if they own their parcels of land. That is when you see them coming to register their rights, or if the land was gifted to them when they got married by family, or if she is a widow and lived very well with a man's family, or under a husband's permit, or maybe the husband loves the wife and he too wants the wife to be included on the parcel of land. So when you see, we look at this, you find the most of the time women shun out because of maybe not being permitted by the husband, or maybe because they have not been allowed to be part of the parcels registration by their spouses. And also during objection, correction, and confirmation stages, women were allowed, the claims, some women were missing out in those periods when you are registering the beneficiaries. So when you take back the maps and the village register, we used to allow women to come again to observe, to look at how the parcels were demarcated, the boundaries, if there are any disputes, and if there are people who were the at that point of time concerning land. And we looked at men, and the men had rights to own parcels and register in their own name without any difficulties. So they didn't have any difficulties, like they can go and register their names without any problems or anyone questioning them. Then they had also rights to speak freely in public meetings over matters of land. Then they were accepted and generally have knowledge about it, boundary works as head of families. Usually it was men numerator to go and do the parcel documentation. So you find that the men had very good knowledge about the parcels documented, which had been documented, and also it's their own boundaries. Then we had also the rights, they had also the rights to decide about the land and they have power to share it. So a man, you find that he can decide whether to divide his ranch to his own children, or to do whatever he wants to do with the ranch, or to make a productive use of it. So those are some of the rights which we discovered with men. And with women, women had rights to inherit land, but the spouse had more power to decide on land matters. Meaning that even if a woman had the rights to inherit that land, the husband, whatever is going to be produced on that land, it is the man, actually the spouse, who has the power to decide on what they are going to be doing with the products which they have just harvested or used. Then women were guarded to speak or air certain views in public. So women are not freely, like when they go out for a public meeting, you find for them to speak in public, they can only speak mostly through the husband. Maybe we have discussed earlier on at home, and but when it is in public, for her to stand up freely in public and speak freely on what is concerning them, it was more like a taboo. Then the other one is the participation in boundary works limited by distance and the household choice. So you find the distances limits the women because of long distance to the fields. They looked at the household choice, and for them to go out to the field, it was more difficult, more especially just for those who have just been married to that village. Then lack of power and the unilaterally decide over, they had no power to decide, even if they own those, some of them own those parcels, decide on what they're supposed to do with a land unless through the spouse. Then there are some.
Chika, I'm going to have to ask you to speed up quite a bit.
Okay.
Chika, your time is, you have about 7 minutes.
All right. I'll be done by then.
Thank you.
So men participated throughout the process more than women. That was one of our observations. Men registered more parcels than women. Then women that inherited the land still did not fully participate. Like some of them because of lack of interest and the other responsibilities such as the household chores. Then men drawn in spouses during registration, only to provide details of their children and not to claim the rights. So you find that only women were given chance by men to come and give details, because men usually forget about the years of birth when their children were born and other details. So these are some of the things which we saw when we saw women participating. Then we had some barriers to the registration of land. So some challenges which we encountered were the belief that the land belongs to men. Even in matrimonial inheritance of land, it's often being pushed through male children. So you find that the male children were preferred to be registered first. Then cultural norms, women cannot own land unless through a husband. Just as I mentioned that when a woman wants to go and ask for land, they'll ask for her husband where the husband is. Then there is confusion about where a woman belongs. To her spouse family, she is considered as an outsider, and to her parents, she is viewed as a member of her husband's family. So you find in both ways, most of the time women were left out because of this confusion of where she is and at her husband's family, or the land she is at her parents' family. Then fear of death, and fear of divorce and death. I believe that giving a woman land leads to loss of land in the events of divorce or death. Then the documenting land is seen as a will. So both men and children prefer to register children alone and not include the spouse on a parcel of land to secure inheritance. So it was observed here that the children were just preferred to register and leaving a spouse out. But mostly it was the male children who were registered first and the spouses later. Then traditional inheritance practice as traditional inheritance practice versus the law rights to remarry under traditional takes away the right to land. Traditionally, it is unacceptable for a woman to enjoy for a woman to be enjoyed by another man, but it's acceptable for a man to remarry and bring a new wife, a new same land. Then there's a belief that a woman cannot make a good use of land. So traditional not on to traditional, not willing to change culture. So because of the culture, some women refuse to be included in the parcel despite the husband wanting to do so, because it was against their culture. And the lack of attaining resentment from the in-laws or GBVs. Women want to be right with a man's family or relative by refusing to be included on the pieces of land, maybe because they are feared that if they ask for that, for their rights, they may be seen as not following the tribe, the culture. So recommendations which I have, we need to invest more in sensitizing women to encourage women to take part in the process and the claim registration. At least from the data from the onset, I think from what Peter Oke did, we have seen because of that massive sensitization, at least a number of women, almost close to 48% had registered their rights. So we need to continue encouraging them. Then integrating gender fully at the process, integrating gender fully in the process at form the beginning of the project to maximize the impact. So gender must start from the beginning, not midways. Then capacity building of staff and the training internal buy-in help to come up with the approaches that are acceptable and everyone in the project. So when the staff have been trained at the beginning, you get a lot of information from the beginning according to culture and what, and you can even make a good adjustment even as you go in with a project. Just as Adam mentioned, because of different cultures, different tribes, you find that you need to understand the culture each time you move to a different chiefdom. Then involvement of traditional leaders to influence positive change. Men are more likely to listen to traditional leaders than the project itself. So the traditional leaders, the indonors, the head persons, they must be really involved first. Then simplify the issue of women to understand the value of documenting land in their names. So we need to have that simplified way of making sure that women understand it than making it very complex. Then the last one which I have today is create enough time to deal with women inclusion issues. So we need some more time, more especially during the claim registration. When you have discovered that a man has not included the spouse, we can ask for a man to speak on one-to-one on why he has not included the spouse, and also giving him the benefit of including his spouse. So this is my end of the presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chika. Appreciate you speeding up as well, even though those last parts were really very insightful and useful. You know, there is a bit of a discrepancy here. You demonstrated early on that within these processes, women's names are being recorded at 50% of the time, which from a statistical level may say, women's rights are protected here. But I think you show a number of reasons why, in fact, those rights are still considered less than men's. So I don't know if you can maybe sort of chat about that really briefly. How did you get to 50% documentation, but still feel that women's rights are perceived as weaker in that context? How did that emerge?
Okay, I think because of more sensitization to the men, most especially when we started working in Nyampande, men, because of when we sensitized the Indunas, they went and now started helping the project staff to make sure that the women, every time a man is registering and they speak, they convene a meeting. And once they convene a meeting, they tell the head person of what they are expecting the communities to do to register their spouses. Now, on the part of why we still feel we have not done enough, even if those women were registered, it is on paper that they were registered, but the change out there is not the change in people's mind is not yet there as to why these women have been included. So the rights are not yet fully protected, despite them being registered on the village register.
Yeah, thanks, Chika. I think that's, for me, the key point is that with the enumerators who you may work with, who are the interface and helping to document, they know from their training that, the donors and the CDLA will push for having more women on the document. So it matters how you speak with community members. If you're asking someone, this is your land, what is your spouse's name? And then sort of pushing people to document rights. On the one hand, that's, potentially good because you're getting someone's name on a piece of paper. On the other hand, they may not fully understand why. They may feel pressured into that documentation. There is one question. Well, actually, now there's two questions here. So can you, well, actually coming to Nellie's question, how do you feel you've practical measures to achieve gender balance? What have those activities been? I think you noted traditional leadership, ensuring that the head persons, when you arrive, understand the objectives and are discussed. And then, as Adam had just reflected on, that at the chiefdom structure, that rights are recognized. And then you said enumerator training for the field. What other actions have you taken or seen effective in getting in helping to change mindsets, whether at the household level? How have you, what sort of tools have you used in the field to help people, Chika?
Okay, thank you. I think just as I earlier mentioned, I think the key part was when you are making an appointment before you go out for a sensitization meeting, more emphasis on the head persons themselves.
Yes, you're back. You're back. Yeah,
okay.
You're a little slow, but you're good.
Oh, I see. Sure. So I mean, when we're making appointments, I think this other processes you'll find this time around, which makes us to see more increase, is when you are making an appointment with the traditional leaders, most especially the head persons. We used to emphasize to them the need for women to attend these meetings. Because once you go out there and you find men, women may not be able to raise their concerns because they are absent in those meetings. So because of that, we allowed the head persons to make sure that the women should come. And even before we start our meetings, when we have seen that women are not present, we would wait for a while and tell the head person and the induna that please let the women come, including the youth, and participate in these meetings. So as they participate, they are also able to freely now air their concerns. So because of that, now there was that mutual agreement between the men and the women to now speak out, because the head person, by then, just because of the initial meetings, which we had to allow women to speak on those meetings, which really also helped us. So that Great. Is one of them. Sure.
Great. And you're welcome also to type into the chat or into the questions and answers to help fill that out as well. I was helping type those as you spoke. A quick question on the customary land rights documentation from Joseph. Chica, if you feel comfortable answering, what rights are registered, and how are they recognized? How are they seen as important? And do you see them being recognized by districts and state institutions so far?
Thank you very much. The rights which were registered during the process, number one, when we are registering a woman, we encourage the spouses to be included on the parcels, meaning that when they are included on the parcels of land, they are got the rights to use the land and also to have benefits out of the products which they whether they will come out from that land. Then there are some rights, like the rights to the forest. You find
Oh, you're breaking up again, Chica. I may jump in here with the customary land documentation rights.
Like for the BCP, which are
Sorry, I'll just jump there. That yes, the customary land rights are documented as a landholder within the chiefdom, and as persons of interest. The persons of interest are registered there during this first phase, primarily because we want to ensure that anybody with an interest in the land is documented. In practice, the chiefs and communities are using that almost as a will to understand who may have a right to the land in the event of death or divorce or any other contests that may come up with the land. Are they recognized by state institutions? Yes, I mean, they have been used in the courts as evidence of individuals' rights to be in a location that have been recognized by the traditional structure. And now in the land policy that was released 2 months ago, those rights are further solidified and recognized, as are the rights of women to own and control land. The practice, though, needs to be strengthened, of course. We still also, as highlighted last week, land rights for women within the law are weaker on customary land than on state land. On customary land, on state land, women have the right to inherit land in the event of death automatically. In customary land, that does not automatically transfer over. Happy to further reflect on that. On sustainable land management, the first step is making sure that we know who has rights to manage that land, and then the actual management of forest, soil, water, those are up to the bylaws at the community level. In some cases, those are customary. In other cases, as you're well aware, Sylvester, they'll refer back to community forest management or regular forestry department roles. So those other obligations come out through activities beyond the initial documentation process. With that, though, I will move us over to the question of state land. Chika presented some of the experiences in documenting customary land and the barriers that are encountered. But what I'd like to do now is hand the floor over to Damuna Piri to reflect on the national titling program and how that is going with respect to women's land rights. Damuna is completing a Master's of Law in Jurisprudence and has a Bachelor of Laws from the University of South Africa. She's a member of the Young African Researchers and Agriculture Network. She's worked at local, regional, and international levels and has demonstrated expertise in social and economic justice, research, dispute resolution, legal and policy reform on land governance. Recently, she's been involved in the National Land Titling Program with Medici Land Governance, providing legal and socioeconomic expertise, particularly on women and other vulnerable groups' inclusion in land titling. Damuna has done research and publications on land governance, including on customary land and state land tenure regimes, gender, inheritance, large-scale land acquisition. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Damuna.
All right, thank you, Matt. So my presentation, I'll just dig into it, is realizing women's land rights and land titling. So we currently have a land titling program, a national land titling program that's going on at the moment within the country. So there's a company called Medici Land Governance that signed an agreement with the Ministry of Lands to actually issue out 4 million titles. And at the moment, the work started with Lusaka and expanding now Kafue, as well as moving to the Copper Belt to issue out title deeds on statutory land, under and planned settlement areas mostly. So with this project that I've mentioned, it's been very necessary to actually looking at the fact that it's nationwide, and also the fact that most of the times when it comes to women or comes to property, women are often affected. And with the project, it was very important that women are actually considered throughout the whole entire process to ensure that they actually participate, are included, are consulted, as well as we get to see them owning property. So we see that most of the times the challenges there's so many challenges within our society that women actually face. And like last week, we highlighted quite a number of them. And we note with the National Land Titling Program that it is important to promote women's land rights in this specific program of land titling, because we definitely want, as we document parcels of land, we definitely want to ensure that we minimize difficulties in the future. What we've seen in these communities is that there's quite a lot of for instance, I'll give an example of property grabbing that may happen, and a woman is not able to put that property on a title deed with this land titling program because the property has been taken away by the either the in-laws, you know, the relatives to the deceased spouse. And we see that women usually face that challenge. And I'll talk about some of the the cases that we probably handled and have been able to resolutions have been reached, and women have actually been able to register those properties in my next slides. And also mainly to maximize economic security for women as well. Most of the times they, like I said earlier, they lag behind in terms of participating even just in economic development for themselves, but also generally for the families, and just taking part in what's happening, even contributing in society. And also to define, of course, opportunities. There's greater opportunities when somebody has a title deed, and also improving their social status within the communities that they live. This can also help them come up with, have income, generate income. A title deed can be used, for instance, to get a loan from the bank. And if a loan has been gotten, a woman can probably utilize that money to start up a business, and that can actually be beneficial to herself, but also to her family as a whole. And some of the reasons as well is mainly to address the major challenges that women are facing. And these challenges, of course, like we spoke, I think last week, and we set the scene, come a lot from the inadequacies in our laws, our policies, as well as just weak enforcement mechanisms or systems. And I won't go into that to discuss that, because we're talking about the practical side of everything, and also just generally the social issues, the cultural issues that are existing within the communities. And we see quite a lot with this project, a lot of inheritance related matters or inheritance related inequalities that have affected quite a lot of women. And we see challenges of women coming forth to participate even in the whole entire titling process. I'll give an example where you go to a property to actually conduct enumeration or capture information for titling, and a woman is the one that you will find at home. Most of the times the men are out there either working or doing other stuff, but they're never found home. So a woman is the one you'll find at home. And if you ask her for information concerning that property, you'll find most of the times she may not have the actual information, and she's also not entitled to give you that information as it's sitting with her husband. So most of the times I think their participation is actually disturbed at that point. Then also the issues, of course, of them accessing justice, not being able to come up front to actually bring up their cases. And there's so many issues, I think, and barriers, societal issues, cultural issues that also surround them not being able to actually access the justice. And just gaps in information as well as knowledge. That's something that was clearly noted or has been clearly noted in the land titling program, and that there's need to frame information and ensure that the proper channels are actually used to disseminate that information concerning women, so that they come forth and participate, and they also see themselves as being stakeholders in the whole entire process. So what can be done in land titling? So with the land titling process, the first step is obviously obtaining aerial imagery. And in obtaining aerial imagery, it is important, of course, that for instance, the geospatial information systems actually take into consideration the gender aspect. And I think this is something that is yet to be done with the land titling program, because with the geospatial information systems, we see that they are able to actually collect gender differentiated impacts and implications on types of human population, settlement, as well as livelihoods. And I say so as well because it's important. With the geospatial information systems, we can also see some gender dimensions or evaluations of gender dimensions. And the maps can also show us important tools that can actually illuminate social impacts as well as highlight gender decisions of spatial exclusion. I know this is still an area where we are yet to do a bit more work, but I think it's in the land titling program, that's another way we can be able to collect some gender information and be able to frame certain interventions or messaging around some of that information that can be collected from there. Then with the process of recruitment, recruitment mainly of enumerators who go in the field, as well as the communications team that gets to go in the field, and with enumerators, of course, collecting data, doing the door-to-door data collection for titling. The recruitment has been 50% men and 50% males, 50% females. And also, this is similar with the communications team, who are also a huge number, 50% males, 50% females, trying to make sure that there's that gender balance. Mainly because there are quite a number of issues that are encountered even in the communities, where a fellow woman is the only one who can understand, or who can be able to be understood well by the clients that we go to meet in these communities and collect data from. They are more comfortable sometimes talking to a fellow woman. So there is that, there's need for that balance. Then in the training of these enumerators, as well as the communications team, before they go on the ground or go in the communities to actually conduct the work, it's been important to, in the trainings, they've been framed with a gender component to make sure that they know how to use gender sensitive communication, for instance, using gender sensitive language and giving scenarios of sometimes what community members can actually be saying, which is not gender sensitive, and how an enumerator, a communications person, can actually counter that with a gender sensitive message. So that has been done, as well as how to facilitate a gender conversation and prepare for a gender conversation. What do you look out for? All that is usually given within the training. And of course, there's obviously need for refresher courses and for or trainings to constantly keep on engaging in these discussions. Even in this program, it's just not once off, and those have been done over time, but there can still be a bit of improvement there. Then there is also the aspect of sensitization of communities. So with the sensitization of communities, what has happened is, of course, ensuring that the communication strategy, first of all, is gender sensitive. So mainstreaming gender throughout the communication strategy of the land titling program has been done, and also developing context specific material, whether through brochures, leaflets, pop-up stands, and also newsletters or flyers, whatever it is that has been developed. At least there's been some gender component as well. And also the communications team are constantly reminded to use gender sensitive language, because they move in these communities with megaphones. So how do you make sure that you are using gender sensitive language that gets to encourage even a woman to participate in the process, or it empowers a woman to feel that they are also part of the process, and probably they can go home and engage their spouses or family members, stating that they probably also have a voice, and they also have to be considered in terms of documenting, for instance, if it's that property they're living on. And also with the enumeration process, that is parcel by parcel, the enumerators are also encouraged all the time to make provision for gender conversations as well with the people that they are meeting, and encourage joint partnership, joint participation. Because sometimes when you are conducting enumeration, what happens in the field is that when you go to a property, you find if it's a couple, you find the man is the one who gets to speak a bit more. concerning, like I made an example earlier, concerning that particular house or a particular property, and the woman is always quiet, even if she's probably present. So we constantly have to encourage the woman to actually participate. So enumerators have been trained to actually ensure that they encourage that joint participation, even as we try to talk about, that was talked about on customary land, the aspect of joint ownership. So it's through those kinds of encouragement and participation that can yield the result of probably having, seeing this couple jointly putting that property on title. And at the point of public display as well, and communication, community verification, with the verification process, of course, this is a consultative process where community members actually come to a verification site to verify that the information that was collected by the enumerators is actually the correct information. And also to just make sure that if there are any corrections that need to be made at that point, objections, they are done at that stage. But in terms of displaying of maps, what we've noticed is that sometimes the maps can be a bit more technical, and women may not be very familiar in reading them, and there's always need to ensure that they are placed in different locations. So with the land titling program, there's maps that are placed on one side for the women and another section for the men, and they're explained to them differently by the enumerators that are operating on that side. And that is the same thing with also the capturing of the corrections, what type of issues are being reported by the women in terms of objections, in terms of corrections at that stage, what are the issues? And there are some issues also in terms of disputes that arise that are actually reported at that stage and were not reported during enumeration. And they're reported which need to be resolved, where, for instance, a man actually put that property on title and never told the wife, but you find that the wife also wants to be on the title deed. So sometimes when they hear about this, some of them just randomly pop up at the verification site and report such issues. And it's up to the enumerators present to actually now refer the issue, for instance, to the adjudication committee and ensure that it's resolved. So at the point of the adjudication committee where disputes are resolved, so this is happening at the same time with the verification process, again, encouraging women as well to participate. And we see what has been noted is that with the adjudication committee, a lot of disputes that have come up as well are from the women involved, quite a lot of inheritance. And so it's trying to resolve all those issues as well. Then I'll skip to the part of the issuance of offer letters, as well as the issuance of certificates of title. So even at that stage as well, that gender mainstreaming can actually happen, where because there's still communication that happens, sensitization in the communities, telling them, oh, offer letters are being issued, certificates of title are being issued, and encouraging that participation from women. And especially when it's under joint ownership, it's important that not only the women shouldn't just stay behind and allow the men to go and get the offer letters or certificates of title. What is being encouraged in the land titling process is to make sure that both spouses come at the same time and they actually collect their offer letters or the certificates of title. And when it comes to payment of minimum titling fees, for instance, where a woman is single, I think this is an aspect that has been reported quite a lot by the women, and I think there's need to reach some form of an agreement, and I'm sure it's being looked into, but there's no position at the moment. Then what are some of the opportunities and efforts in land titling that have been done? I'm just talking about mainstreaming gender and the ways that gender has been, some examples of how gender has been mainstreamed in the systematic land titling program. Of course, and also the promotion of joint titling that I've been talking about, of course, engaging in legal and policy dialogues with government, concerning some of the issues that get to affect women in owning property. And I think we noted quite a lot last week when we were talking about some of the laws. We've cited the Interstate Succession Act, which has quite a lot of loopholes in terms of a woman's inheritance to property, and also providing, of course, gender trainings to all key stakeholders. All these are opportunities. And these have been done in the systematic land titling program, but of course, there's still need for improvement, and also establishing partnerships with other institutions on gender. It's always helpful when you establish partnerships with other institutions who also have a similar kind of agenda. Most of the times it gets to yield positive results. As you are sharing expertise as well as skills, and just sharing roles as well. Then tracking women's land ownership and participation. This is something that is being done over time with the land titling program, and it's still constantly being improved as well, linked to the M&E process as well, the monitoring and evaluation process on the percentages of how many women are owning property, and what kind of disputes, for instance, are they reporting, and how are those disputes being resolved, and what are some of the issues probably that are affecting them from owning property. So some of those statistics and issues surrounding women's land rights championing are actually some of those that the systematic land titling program is trying to make sure that it documents at this stage. Then, of course, raising of awareness and documenting success stories. There's quite a lot of information on the Medici Land Governance website where stories have been documented on testimonials of community members. And I was talking about sensitization earlier in terms of raising awareness and coming up with gender specific materials as well. Then assembling best practices and developing practice tools. We've seen that the development of practice tools is also quite very helpful. It's still ongoing. There's quite a lot to be done, but it's very helpful for the field people to actually utilize on different topics or different issues at that in that sense. And also resolving of gender-related disputes in communities and providing legal and socioeconomic guidance in land titling. The constant provision of the legal and socioeconomic guidance in land titling to enumerators, to communications team, has actually proved to be very relevant, because the issues within these communities where we're going into are very diverse, and sometimes there may not be any one-word answer, to all of them, and there's need to actually think about ways of addressing some of these issues. Then I'll give examples of cases that have been reported, and in terms of conflict resolution in the promotion of women's land rights. So the number of disputes that have been reported by women from October, when the enumeration process started in 2020, all the way to May 2021, the total number during this period has been 97 disputes, and the ones that were reported by women were 45. And the breakdown of the nature of disputes is 34 boundary disputes and 11 inheritance-related matters. And number of areas, of course, it's 13 areas within Lusaka. And a case study or a case that I can cite is one where a property was captured in a husband's name only. Like I said earlier, sometimes women shy away, and husbands also just want to have they believe they're the ones who own the property. And if they're the ones who contributed money towards its purchase, then they're the sole owners, and they would rather be in ownership with their children and not with a woman or with their spouse. So we saw that this happened in this case, and the wife was not happy, hence reported the matter to Medici, and that was after enumeration had happened. And of course, with the adjudication committee, a mediation session was scheduled and it was conducted, and parties were interested to ensure that they probably can consider putting their property on under joint ownership. And after all the discussions and also sensitization kind of discussions, we saw that the man was actually willing to include the woman as a joint owner as well. Then in terms of the results of strengthened women's land rights and land titling, we see that the results of data that was collected by Medici, that was in the pilot phase, and the pilot phase was mainly from 2018, 2019, and a bit of 2017. So it shows that 47% of parcels were actually owned by women or under co-ownership. So that's 47%. And with this information, we also see that, or what was seen with this after the pilot phase was that the aspect, of course, of ensuring that some women reported that once land was given to them, they were able to actually I mean, a certificate of title, once a certificate of title was actually awarded to them, they felt safer, because some of the issues that surrounded them having that particular property, some of the women on title, is the fact that I gave it earlier of an issue of property grabbing, where sometimes even when a spouse is deceased, who's the man, the woman remains, and most of the times the relatives to the man usually want to take over. They may give her the rights to remain on the property, to live there as long as she wants. They can allocate a room to her, but most of the times you find that they are the ones who occupy the hugest space. So in the event that there were different rooms that were being rented out, for instance, to people, the income that comes from those rooms is usually collected by the actual family members of the deceased spouse, and you find that the woman ends up having no income. But then in certain instances, and I'll give an example of this instance, I'll talk from this example, is that where a woman was actually assisted to get back that whole entire property that she owned jointly with her husband before he died from her in-laws. Most of the time, most of them reported that they felt safer being on the property when the certificate of title came out. And of course, in terms of them also getting income, to actually support their families in terms of food, ensuring that there's enough food in a home for the children, as well as just general health and paying for school fees for their children in that sense was a bit easier as compared to before, when they never had much access to finances. But after having that ability to retain the property and those rooms that are rented out, the income comes to her and to her children. Most of them noted that proved to be very beneficial in that sense. And what are some of the recommendations, of course, with the land titling program? Of course, the land titling interventions on women's land rights definitely need to focus on the robustness of rights, their durability, as well as their ability to be complete. So when we talk about the ability to be complete, is the aspect of having more rights in the bundle of rights. Earlier in the my earlier speakers talked about some of the land rights, and in the bundle of rights we have, of course, the right to use, transfer, manage, control, and collect. So we need to have at least or ensure with the program that the rights in the bundle of rights are more and are actually complete enough. And once they are complete, they also need to be able to be, in terms of robustness, they need to be able to be recognized and attached, and attached, for instance, in the event that they are threatened, they should be attached to, if it's some form of compensation or whatever it is, they should be protected if they have been threatened. And also durable, someone should be able to enjoy them for a period of time. And with the systematic land titling program, a title deed is up to 99 years. So that's already a benefit to the woman who actually gets to put her property on title. And there is need, of course, to devise a mechanism on how women and other vulnerable groups who are unable to afford to pay title fees. I think I mentioned this earlier. It's something that's still being looked at. There is obviously need to come up with options of capturing female landowners who reside out of town and those who are either too ill to travel or do not have finances at that very time to facilitate their travel. I think this is something that is also happening, and these women definitely need help. And there's need for constant refresher trainings for enumerators as well as communications team. This needs to be improved as well, and so much more can be done, as well as the land titling should have a gender-related tools before the actual implementation begins. What had happened before was that the implementation of the project started before the tools were developed, but of course, there is need to have at least the tools and all the mainstreaming done before the process begins. And I think that's just good practice. Then also the land titling program should strengthen gender aspects within the government. We see quite a lot of, I think, loopholes and challenges even just within the government in terms of upholding gender. Practically, it's there on paper, but to see it practically, even through a program like this one, I think that there's still quite a lot of work that needs to be done there. So that ends my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks so much, Damuna. The wonderful presentation and really hit upon all the elements that we're looking at today. I saw some clear parallels with customary land issues in terms of willingness for women to step up and make a claim. And really interesting points you make that differs probably from customary land, where in your state program, the enumerators are going out and it's likely that they are meeting women on the ground for the first time. And when I've joined you all in the field, you know, we've noticed that the woman at home, who oftentimes may be a grandmother or another relative, will then have to call a male relative in order to either find the supporting documentation or be involved. So I think you presented a number of really important interventions that need to be taken and that are relevant to both customary and state land. Of course, another area in state land that is a challenge is that cost. And thanks for raising that issue. This importance of the Intestate Succession Act, which says what happens to inheritance of land and other resources. It's just sort of the legal framework within Zambia that is still probably the most regressive as it comes to women's land rights. Really appreciate that. And I think you highlighted what we're going to come to next, which is something relatively new to me, but it's super important when we're talking about women's empowerment and asking women to step up and assert their rights. How are we keeping women safe? We're asking women to either go potentially behind the backs of their spouses or other family members and raise a point with an organization like Medici or a land alliance. What risk does that place women at? And we're using terms that, at least in Western culture and international culture, grabbing land, chasing women, those terms are commonly seen as soft in some ways. And we haven't been using the term violence. And I think that's changing, that this is actually a form of gender-based violence. And it is, in many times, it leads to physical violence. But even over the past few years, my own impression of this terminology has changed. And that even withholding land from women or withholding women's rights to register their land is a form of violence. And Patricia Malasha, who will be speaking next as the gender advisor for the ILRG program, has really helped me to change my thinking on this. So Patricia, I'm really delighted to have you here to provide some framing thoughts about land and gender-based violence, an emerging topic. So you'll have the last 20 minutes. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you very much, Matt. And good afternoon, everyone. Chilombo, can I have the presentation on? Gender-based violence is expressed in many different ways. It includes physical, psychological, sexual abuse, threats, coercion, and economic deprivation of property, and many other, including insults, which is quite tolerated in our culture, but it's also a form of gender-based violence. But for my discussion this afternoon, I'm going to focus on gender-based violence in the context of land, but just to emphasize that GBV is any harm or potential harm perpetrated against a person or a group of persons on the basis of gender, and in this case, as it relates to land resource. And also just want to mention that gender-based violence is a widespread problem here in Zambia, which affects women and girls much more than men and boys. So it's an important issue for us to consider in whatever interventions we are trying to push forward, because
Patricia, I think we may have dropped you. Patricia. We'll try to get Patricia back, unless it is just me.
I'll give her a call to see if she can log back in.
Apologies, folks. While we wait for Patricia to rejoin us, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to reflect or provide any comments on what's been heard so far. Damuna, I may ask you a question, a practical question presented by Alston just now about how we see widow cases where land is occupied by a widow and they've been remarried. How have you seen this play out in practice? You know, maybe on state land and also on customary land, as I know you have both experiences.
Okay, so in answering the question, when it comes to remarrying, I think already our Interstate Succession Act disadvantages a woman. So in the event that they get to remarry and the property was, because already the assumption is that the property, even I guess even with the questioning, the assumption is that the property was, of course, probably owned by the man. And if the widow gets to remarry, so it means that according to the law as well, the way it states is that they actually get to lose that property if they remarry. So they have interest to be there, but if they remarry, they end up losing those particular kind of interest. And I think practically it's something that that has been noted even with the systematic land titling program, where other people, I'll cite examples of where some family members, like I said earlier, sometimes they can give a surviving spouse the ability to actually stay on that property for as long as they want, but may not necessarily retain ownership. There are some widows who've actually decided to marry or remarry, but still continued to probably stay on that property with the person that they've married, or bring them to that property. And we see conflicts that have arisen amongst those family members, and also in terms of titling, who exactly do you put on the title deed, because sometimes the man that she's married will still be on the title. So sometimes that's the complexity that happens. So practically, I think it just creates conflict. Our laws also do favor a woman, and practically the conflicts, I think, are created at that stage.
Yeah, thanks, Damuna. And I do encourage people to read the Intestate Succession Act. It's quite interesting on the rights that it gives surviving family members and how land is supposed to be divided, or property is supposed to be divided. It's really insightful on these challenges, as Damuna notes. We do have Patricia back. Thanks, Patricia. Sorry we lost you. Feel free to continue. Hopefully we didn't lose you for too long.
Yeah, sure. My apologies about that. Yes, so I was just trying to highlight the fact that when it comes to land rights, GBV is a complex issue already, but I think it's much more complex when it comes to land rights, because there are a number of factors that come to play, and that's the legal and policy framework in this country, and how supportive that is, the existing social and cultural norms, the family dynamics, and to some extent, just the level of economic independence. As we know, most of our women are not economically independent, and they depend on their spouses. So all these issues, including just the lack of a supportive system and services where women can go and seek redress. So all these issues put together, they really just make the whole GBV issue and land much more complex. So let me now get to speak about what we did as a program, and working with our partners. Chika and Adam from CDLA and PDLA have already shared how we attempted to integrate gender in the systematic customary land documentation, and the successes that were there in terms of documenting women's land rights. But also just to mention that we made GBV awareness to be part of the program. And with that, we also ensured that we documented the experiences and stories of women who experienced disputes or issues related to land that were of GBV nature. So what I will be sharing with you is mostly the lessons from our implementation, and based on the information that we gathered over the period 2019 and 2020. But before I do that, let me just share with you quite quickly the strategies that we used to make sure that we gave gender-based violence attention in the program. And one of them was to develop the capacity of the staff, the implementing partners, to have that understanding of what GBV is actually, because it's quite easy in our context to ignore certain experiences and discount them as not being GBV. So that awareness itself was very important, and that capacity development was very important. It's not only the enumerators and the field team that needed to have that understanding, even the community members themselves required to have that understanding. So we had this mammoth task to build that understanding and awareness around GBV, and also to allow the staff have that capacity to be able to monitor GBV cases and make referrals where it's required, or the woman required that support. And then we also ensure the active participation of women in all the steps of land documentation so that they can understand and look out for their interests, without which it was going to be very difficult for these women to actually understand that what their experience is not right. Then the other aspect also is we had accompanying this land documentation a very strong gender responsive conflict prevention and resolution strategies. And this is where largely we also picked out the the GBV stories and documented them. And then we of course have spoken about community sensitization. That was very important. And Adam spoke about engagement of traditional leaders, the Indunas. And for the program, we are not just engaging, working with the chiefs and the traditional leaders or the Indunas and head persons in the areas where we were documenting land, but we have gone further and are working with the House of Chiefs to develop customary gender guidelines that can empower traditional leaders, our chiefs countrywide, to understand how they can respond or intervene to promote the rights of women as it relates to land. Then accompanying our work in land as well was the continued collection and analysis of the evidence of the relationship between land documentation and GBV. And this is where what I'm just going to be sharing with you is coming from. It's from that continued collection, analysis, and documentation of what was happening. So these were some of the lessons, and I'm not going to speak much in the interest of time, but I want to refer you to the picture you see on my right there. That's the publication that we've done, and at the end I'm giving you the address, the website where you can find that publication, and in your own time you can be able to take and read. It's a very interesting publication, and I think you're going to get a lot more detail than what I'm going to say this afternoon because of time. But what we found was that GBV, it affects women of all ages when it comes to land. It's not only the elderly and the vulnerable, it was all women, including those who were married, and including women who were strong and capable of having land and being able to work and add value to that land. And then also, just to mention that we found that violence is not only perpetuated by husbands or by men, but it was by everyone, the children, the cousins, the uncles, and the aunts, even the neighbors. There were cases where we found that sometimes it was the aunt, because the mother died and passed on the land to the daughter or to the niece, and it was the aunt who was not happy and who was causing GBV or insulting that child or threatening that child so that she can move out of the land and they can repossess it. And then we also found that changes in the marital status, such as divorce or becoming a widow, just increase the vulnerability of women to GBV. And then widows, especially the childless widows, were particularly more vulnerable to GBV whenever women, their spouses died and they had no child with that spouse. The easiest thing that relatives wanted to do was to push that woman out of the land. And then the other finding also was that women experience different types of GBV, but these types were actually connected. For instance, the denial of access and ownership or property grabbing, it was often accompanied with physical violence or threats of physical violence. All that was happening because the families were trying to deny this woman ownership of the land. So it was all kind of a combination different types of GBV that women experience when it comes to land. And if women tried to assert their rights, chances of them facing even much more risk of GBV were quite high. Then the other issue also was that women are affected by GBV in both patrilineal and matrilineal areas. I think this discounts the idea that because matrilineal areas allow women to inherit land, therefore there's no GBV. What we found that women can inherit land, but power inequalities and gender norms, they continue to threaten tenure security for those women. And we also found that women, even in maternal, in matrilineal areas, the culture says the men move to the woman's village, but in practice, we found that what is commonly happening is that women are the ones who leave the villages to go and settle in other areas. And then, of course, the issue of divorce and getting widowed, something that I've talked about, exposed women to higher chances of experiencing GBV because they were looking for all ways of pushing them out so that they can go back to their villages. And there are all sorts of items and sayings that exist in our traditional culture that says the woman should go back where she came from. So this is really a huge challenge in land. And then also, we found that the land documentation process itself can lead to family conflict and to GBV that often exposed women to intra-family and intra-community conflicts. And in some cases, documentation of land just created this resentment and increased conflicts between spouses and families, in a sense that when land was being documented and the woman was left out, she felt resentful about the whole idea, but can't speak out. So in the process, there was just this family disunity that increased in the home. And because of that, we found that it led to further incidences of GBV. So, and then those conflicts, they actually persist even after the land or the certificate was issued. And we found that there were even examples of individuals, men who testified that after the certificate and after the inclusion of the wife, there was a lot of peace and harmony in the family. So it could create both disunity as well as unity. So it's very important to pay attention to the process and how the process is happening, involving everyone, being inclusive, so that such kinds of GBV can be minimized. And then the traditional leaders, we found that these are really key in addressing GBV. And I think I won't dwell much on this because Adam presented how we try to engage the traditional leaders and some of the successes that we were able to realize as a program because of that support of the traditional leaders. So let me just give you a few recommendations that we think can be very helpful and useful in minimizing incidences of GBV in land documentation. One of them is that it's very important to have strong and comprehensive approach to prevent and respond to GBV. And unless programs are paying attention from the project design to the time frame, to the capacity of staff, it's very likely that GBV can be part of whatever we are trying to address and remain unattended to. So it's very important that programs pay attention to that. Equally, giving adequate time frame in the program. Often we get under pressure. We have a time frame to achieve so many set targets, And because of that, we really don't have time to pay attention to which woman is experiencing what. Unless programs really give and allow time for some of these issues to be looked into, it's likely that they will be missed. And then the other recommendation is just that we need to be mindful of the local context and the potential unintended consequences like GBV. I think in some of the societies, like Adam said, the Ngoni society, where women are not allowed to own land, we really need to understand that it's not just a question of having them as co-owners or as pushing them to have the land, but that we really need to deal with all these other issues, cultural norms, you know, and how we can change those negative cultural norms so that a woman is truly empowered. And then also the other issue that also comes out of our cultural beliefs or our cultural norm is the treatment or the perception that some of these issues like GBV are private issues. So a lot of GBV that happen, especially between intimate partners, does not have to come out. That is very strong in our culture, and a lot of women experience GBV and go silent and quiet around that. And unless programs are opening up and creating opportunities for women to understand that this is not right, they need to speak up, they need to come out, they need to be helped, then we'll miss the boat. Then the other point is just that there are different forms of GBV related to land tenure, and we need to be looking beyond physical violence, because that's what often we're looking out for, but that is just the worst form of violence. There are many other types of and forms of violence happening along the way that are very important and need to be acknowledged and addressed. And then engaging the authorities and bearing in mind that GBV can be perpetuated by individuals, but it's also something that needs to be looked at in terms of the institution. For instance, the traditional institution. A lot in our experience, we found that some of the perpetrators of violence were actually the traditional leaders who had the power and used that power to intimidate the women over their land. So it's very important that we're not just looking at individuals, but we are looking at changing the institutions and how those institutions perceive issues of GBV and attend to them. And then also just investing in strengthening community governance structure. In our case, what worked well really is the local land governance structures that we created on the ground, that women who were affected and understood that the person who was involved was well connected, maybe with the traditional leader, or is a head person, or is an uncle to the chief, you know, they had to go to the local land governance structure committee to seek redress. So it's very important that we work with these structures and strengthen them. We don't ignore them at all. They have an important role. And lastly, actively engaging men and women and the local leaders to shift the harmful gender norms. And I think this is really important. It takes time, but we have to start somewhere. And as programs, we need to leave a mark that we started this at least, and this is where we ended. Let me just have the last slide and just give you where you can find more information in this documentation publication that we've done on gender-based violence and land documentation and administration in Zambia. You actually find the actual stories of the women as they experience GBV on the ground, and it's www.land-links.org. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patricia.
Sorry, I had to rush through that.
Thank you for time. We are 5 minutes over, but you know, it's such an important topic, and there is such a depth of detail and experience within that that document. So hugely appreciated. You know, I think it's really important now that we consider these elements as we promote women's land rights and make sure that we are not causing harm, even as we push the envelope with traditional leaders and community leaders and households. As we've seen, even in some of the questions and the way that we frame discussions and ask, we have biases that still assume that the man has more rights to land, even those of us who are engaged in this work. And so, yeah, I really appreciate it. So it's a long-term process, and attention to this this issue is crucial. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for being here, and really encourage folks to follow up. We will send out a report on this particular event. We will hold additional events and meetings. The gender-based violence report, when we released it last year, you know, we had some release discussions and meetings. So we'd love to do the same. We would love to continue working with the National Titling Program on lessons and how how they can be applied. So please do continue to be in touch with each other. The report will go out in the coming weeks on this set of webinars. And if anybody has experiences they would like to share, very happy to continue that and hold additional webinars and meetings as the year goes on. In these days of COVID and coming to elections, we encourage everyone to be safe, but be active, and really hoping that the COVID situation improves on the ground in the coming weeks and months, so that we can meet again in person soon. The webinars indeed are all being recorded and shared on the YouTube channel for ILRG. Are there any final questions or comments? Patricia, this is really your 2 sessions. Is there anything you'd like to say to close us out?
No, just to thank everyone, I think, which you've already done. And I think that this has been an important learning opportunity. And I know that today we probably haven't had as much audience as we did last time, but I'm glad that we've had the same people who were there last time come through. So I'm hoping that in the near future we can have more opportunities, and I just want to encourage everyone to really get to be part of this. I think we need to increase our voice around issues of women land rights, and also just rights of women as it relates to all other natural resources in this country. And I just want to say that in the near future, very near future, we are also looking out to an opportunity to discuss rights of women as it relates to participation and leadership in the governance around our natural resource management. So please be on the lookout for that opportunity as well. And I look forward to see and interact with most of you, even outside of this forum.
Thanks, Patricia.
Thanks, Matt.
And then special thanks to Chilombo as well for managing this series of must be about 10 webinars over the past 2-3 months on various topics. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon, and yeah, we look forward to continuing to be in touch with you all. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.